Good afternoon. My name is Charlie Hank, and I'm a member of the Historical Committee. As part of the Society program to conduct the leadership recall interviews, today we are in Chicago for the 1993 winter meeting. It's our pleasure today to interview past or presidential member Chuck Sepsy, who was president of Society in 1980 and 1981. Chuck, welcome to our interview.
Thank you.
I want to start off, Chuck, by having you give us a little background on yourself, your education and work experience.
Okay. Grew up in Rochester, New York, and after high school, I joined the Air Force and became a pilot. Flew B-17 bombers and B-29 bombers in World War II. After that, I came back, and the GI Bill, I was able to go to some school, and I went to University of Tennessee for undergraduate work, and then back to Rochester at the university for my master's degree, and then from there I went to Ohio State University, where I worked on my PhD. And I liked Ohio State so much, mainly because of the football team, and we stayed there, and I've been a professor and research supervisor for some 39 years at Ohio State University.
Oh, so you like staying with Woody Hayes in the football years when they were...
Woody Hayes and I we both arrived at Ohio State in June of 1951, so...
That's good, that's good. So what kind of projects were you involved in at Ohio State throughout the years?
Well, eventually I became a full professor and director of research in the area of environmental control, which was heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, as we know. And I was responsible for all the graduate and undergraduate courses that were taught in that particular area. And then during that period of time, we had a number of really outstanding projects, research projects. We started off with some fundamental studies on frost formation, on extended surface heat exchangers for the Edison Electric Institute. And also there was a sponsored ASHRAE project, one of the first ones back, that was about 57, I guess it was, something like that. Then we had a very extensive one for Columbia Gas, where we studied fuel utilization in gas-fired commercial buildings. Then after that, we got into an extensive project. In fact, at that particular time, it was the largest project that ASHRAE had ever funded. It was something close to $250,000, if my memory recalls. And it was a field validation of the algorithms of the ASHRAE heating and cooling load programs. And what we did, we took a building on Ohio State campus. It was completely instrumented with some 100 data points, complete weather station on top of the building, and we measured for an entire year, every 15 minutes, the various points of measurement, airflow, temperatures, and so on and so forth, energy requirements, and so forth, for the building. This was all put on computers, and in turn, then we used that to develop a program where we could use it in conjunction with the ASHRAE algorithms, and we came out with with a validation of the program that the Department of Energy, at that time it was the National Bureau of Standards that started with, and then from there it went to the DOE, and it was a validation of the DOE-1 program. And that was a very interesting project, one that was, I think, very basic in the validation of the heating and cooling loads that we have for the ASHRAE program. From that, we went to a very extensive one for EPRI, which is the Electrical Power Research Institute, where we had 8 residential homes in the Columbus area. These were completely instrumented, some 30 to 50 points in some of them. In fact, my house was one of them. It was a one-story ranch-style house. We had a computer, an IBM System 7 computer in the garage, and every time the door opened, or my wife would turn the refrigerator, open the refrigerator door, or turn the stove on, or the oven or something, the computer would know it. And we also had a complete weather station in my backyard. But we had 8 homes. There were different styles, different orientations, but they were all living. They were all had families. There were two adults and 2 children of teenage. So they were, from 10 to 18, something like that. In addition to that, we had what they call a control house. It was just an empty house. We actually had it built, and we completely instrumented, and we used that as the control, and we measured it against the actual building energy used for an occupied house. When that was completed, we then went to 9 different cities in the United States, and we took 8 homes once again through the local utility, local electric utility, and we also then set up measuring devices. This is not by computers, but of other means of measuring about 15 different points of energy use in the residential homes. And all this information was then fed back to Ohio State, in which we analyzed and so forth. And the purpose of that was to get the geographical differential and so forth. That was we did that for an entire year, so we got heating and cooling loads as well. And it resulted in 10 or 12 ASHRAE papers. This was not an ASHRAE project, but certainly ASHRAE is very much interested in attuned to it and very much involved in one way or another. Those are some of the more important research projects we worked on. In 1974, we built the first solar house in the state of Ohio. It was done through cooperation of all local industries and industries such as PPG that gave us the solar collectors and so forth. And we built the house, and it was open for the Ohio State Fair. We had thousands of people going through it. The house was completely instrumented again. We had an IBM System 7 computer in the garage measuring all the data and so forth. It was an empty house during the period of time when the fair was not going on. Eventually, when we were through with our project, the fair director moved into it, and I guess he's still living there as far as I know. But that was another interesting project, but it's a demonstration project.
Are they still measuring any of the data on that house?
No, not in that house.
Are the solar panels still there?
No, the panels were taken down and converted, mainly because they were having some leaks around the panel, not the panel themselves, but the roof itself. So, but we had finished our project, and then I guess the panel stayed there for 4 or 5 years, and then they took it down. But we had walked away from the project at that time.
Are you seeing any additional research today in the area of solar energy?
It has lost its emphasis of we had in the 1970s and so forth, and there was very little going on. Last year, I think 2 years ago, so we did pretty much of a survey of activity of going in the solar field, and it was very, very limited.
How did you get started in ASHRAE, Chuck?
Well, I guess I have to contribute that to one of my old professors, Aubrey Brown, and he was one of the co-authors of the first heat transfer book written by Brown and Marco. And he was an ASHRAE director many, many years ago. And he took me to my first ASHRAE meeting as a graduate student at Ohio State University. He took me to Pittsburgh. We took the train over. And that was my first meeting of ASHRAE. And of course, teaching in that area, that's really my interest.
So then from there, you went to your first meeting, then you got involved in chapter activities.
Yeah, very much
in the Ohio area.
I was through all the chairs on the Columbus chapter, and then was president. And from that, I went as regional director of 5, and I served in that position for 3 years. And then I became a director at large. And as director at large, I was involved in that for 3 years as well. And as a director at large, you're responsible, at least we were at that time, for various technical committees, various committees. It could be a program committee, or it could be the research and R&D committee. But the DARs are responsible for those different areas.
And what kind of technical committees have you been involved with in ASHRAE over the years?
Well, I was on the heat transfer committee, and thermodynamics committee, duct design committee, one for heating and cooling load calculations, and I forget the number. No, we've changed a lot of these numbers over the years, and so, but it was the heating and cooling load calculation committee. I think it was TC 4.1. I could be wrong on that.
Well, that ties back into a lot of the research you've been doing over the years.
Oh, yeah, right,
Right.
so.
That's right in there.
Mhm.
Okay. Getting into your year as president of the society, what was your theme for that year?
Okay, the theme was continuing growth through professional development. Remember, a number of years ago, we had a very active group in ASHRAE. They wanted to take the R out of ASHRAE, and we have it today, R in ASHRAE. We have our ASHRAE refrigeration cocktail parties and so forth. And we got the idea, well, why not take the E out of ASHRAE and use it for education, engineering, and energy. And so we made a theme around those three particular things, particularly in education, being a professor, very much interested in young people. And I think our source of manpower is definitely going to be our young people, and we have to replace people like myself who are going to be retiring soon, and they have to come in and take the helm of the ship. So I was very strong in getting young people involved in ASHRAE, young graduates on the local level, in ASHRAE chapters, and then also on the national level. In fact, the committee was formed, young people in ASHRAE, and it was a standing committee for a while. Then also along that same line, untapped, I should say, is our young female engineers. More and more, the percentage of women going into engineering is increasing. 20 years ago, they 1%. Now it's up 10, 15, 20%. And some of them even higher than that, like particularly electrical engineering. And this is a real potential for ASHRAE to get more young people into ASHRAE, and so I was very much in favor of getting the women in ASHRAE involved. Then, of course, in energy or engineering, we took a very strong stand on continuing education through professional development. And during my term as president, we started a lot of the programs of professional development that are very strong now, and they're being presented all over the country on controls, the heating and air conditioning, load calculations, and so forth. And then, of course, on energy, the third E was energy conservation in buildings, existing and in new buildings. And of course, during that period, I think 81, we had the first revision of 9075 of all three sections.
Okay. What was happening in the world during your time? In 79, I guess we had another oil shortage. What was happening in the early 80s and 81?
Well, we were still getting over that shock of long lines and gasoline lines and so forth. And that's one of the reasons we really pushed for energy conservation. We felt that rather than alternative sources of energy, such as solar and geothermal and so forth, the impact could be really on energy conservation. And we have demonstrated that in a number of buildings where we can save 30 to 40 to 50% of the energy being used. Just about that time, about 80 to 79, the president of the university called me in and said, Sepsy, you're supposed to be an expert in energy conservation, that I have a utility bill that's $3 to $4 million a year, I have 150 buildings on this one campus alone, so I want you to do something about it. And so when he tells you this, you don't say, no, sir, I'm too busy, you know. So really what we did, we set up a very strong committee consisting of two portions. One is the service department on the campus, which are the people involved in the day-by-day maintenance and so forth, repairs and so forth. And then in the mechanical engineering department, we have what they call the environmental control group, and we were involved in the calculations, the analysis and so forth. And we went through the campus building by building. We took it completely apart. We went in, we had our field people going in, making measurements of where the energy was being used by various methods, airflow measurements, air distribution, and so forth, investigating the thermal breaks and investigating the structure of the building itself, such as doors, windows, and so forth. And then we would make recommendations, and we do our calculations naturally first, and then from that we make recommendations of if we can save X amount of dollars by doing this, and X amount of dollars by doing this. And so the first building we did was a very interesting one. I think we spent, our recommendations to spend $31,000, which is not very much in today's monetary world, but it was like $31,000, and we told them what we ought to get a payback in about a year and a half. And this had to go to the board of trustees, and they voted on it and said, well, we'll give them a chance, we'll let them spend $31,000. They did, and we did, and we got a payback in about 8 months. So they were ecstatic over this. They said, oh, it's great, you know, let's do it some more. And so we went to the next building, and we went through all the major buildings on the campus during that period of time in that early 80s and so forth. And really, we were one of the leading campuses throughout the country. We had administrators coming from all parts of the country, talking to the president and other people, our groups sometimes, and we make presentations to them of what we can doing on the campus. And we really got the whole campus involved as well. That was another aspect of it. Like you turn your lights out when you go out of the classroom type of thing. You don't open the windows when the air conditioning is on. Those simple things, you know, or leaving the doors open and propping the doors open. And so we tried to get campus involvement with students and faculty. I think it was very successul.
Why not just educating the people that were using the building?
Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right, okay. What significant accomplishments happened during your term as president of society?
Well, we had a number of things that happened. I think perhaps one of the most difficult was the fact that when I was still an officer of the society, we found out that we were so overcrowded at our New York offices, and we were in the engineering building, and I think we occupied around 12,000 square feet, and the staff was about 40 or 50 at that time, and it was so crowded they had some desks in the corridors even, and the storage room was in the corridor, piles of books and so forth. So, you know, so what are we going to do? So we was our executive committee and then to the board said, well, you know, we can move across the street, get some room there, but then you have two. How does A talk to B when they're over here? Well, we can move outside the city. We can go to Long Island. We're going to go to Long Island. Why don't we go somewhere else? And so we set up a committee, and they investigated what cities would be the best to go to, you know, as far as availability of manpower, ease of transportation, and all the other factors that go into when you're making a room. And they did a very super job on it. We came back with 3 cities: Washington, D.C., Dallas, Texas, and Dallas, Houston area, in that area there, and then Atlanta, Georgia. So the committee that was formed went to, and I was not on that committee, but I was the executive committee then. They went around and they looked at these various availability of buildings and so forth, and we came up with Atlanta, Georgia. So we started looking at property in Atlanta, Georgia, and we found a lovely property on the northeast section of town, on I-85 and Druid, I guess, Druid. I think that's the road. So we found this property, and when I was president, had a $2,400,000 check that I presented to the owner's representative, and so we had a new building. It was some 32,000 square feet, a little bit more than we needed. But then we had people up here, and we had this empty building down here, so we had to move them. And of course, if you know New York, there's no place like New York City, you know. I'm not going to move. And so out of about 40, 50 staff, I imagine we lost 15 or 20. Director of standards, membership, director of membership, and so forth. They just didn't want to leave their family and their ties in New York City, and a number of others, of course. High-level members of our permanent staff. And our first move was to move the research and technical department under the leadership of Richard Wright. Richard, his first day aboard was the day that I became president, which was in 1980 at the Denver meeting, and that was his first meeting. And so he moved, he took his department down to Atlanta in January of 1981, and then by June, the rest of the staff left. And of course, we had to have some replacements for some of these people, and one of the important ones was, I guess, Andy Boggs at that time felt that he had been with the society for so many years that he wanted to retire. So we started looking around. This is before I became president, but I was president-elect then, and we set up a committee and we interviewed a number of people all over the country, and we hired a new director as executive director, but Frank Cota at that time was then hired during my period as president, and came in as, I think the title was assistant executive director, because Andy was going to stay on for a year or so to help in that transaction period. So Frank Cota then has now been with us some 12 years. And also Richard Wright, as I mentioned, as director of technology. And then we had, for director of membership, a young lady who was no longer with us, Andy Abbott. She is married and has left our organization. But it was quite a move to go from New York City and to relocate. But I will say, I think any of the people that did relocate, they're just so happy they moved to Atlanta. They like the city, they like the environment, they like they just seem to be very pleased. I hope they're, I hope what they're saying is a truism.
It's probably a different lifestyle, a lot slower paced than New York. I mean, I think of the Big Apple as being very fast paced, and I think of the South as being a little slower, more laid back. I'm sure it's very more relaxing to everybody.
So you were also asking some of the other things. One of the fun things was that it was the first time that ASHRAE had a meeting outside the continental United States with another society, and we had the CIBS, C-I-B-S, which is a Chartered Institute of Building Services, which is the counterpart to ASHRAE in Great Britain. And ASHRAE, we had a joint conference on May 10th through the 14th, 1981. And we attended that, and there's some 200 members were in attendance. We had 62 technical papers. It was a very significant event as far as the history of society goes, because it's truly showing to the world that ASHRAE is an international society. So that was very important, and also it was a memorable experience for me going to Great Britain and joining with our overseas members. We have, of course, a lot of members in Great Britain and Ireland and so forth.
It's really interesting how today, how there are a lot more international members of ASHRAE, and how there are a lot different meetings all over the world that ASHRAE is involved in. It really has grown tremendously in the last 12 years.
It really has.
It's a real, says a lot for ASHRAE and the programs and the research that they've been doing.
Another thing that I think came out was quite interesting during that period of time of my presidency was I mentioned energy and energy conservation. We always felt in order to make this more important to the practicing engineer, that there would be some kind of award to show his excellence, not in a monetary way, but as a peer review and so forth, to say, well, here, this guy did a good job in this design. So we instigated our first ASHRAE Annual Energy Award in that year, and it was set up for 3 different categories. It was institutional, commercial for new construction, and the other was institutional, commercial for existing buildings, and then industrial buildings. And there were first, second, and third place in each of these 3 categories. And at the meeting in Cincinnati, we awards and plaques for so forth. We got our director of publications and his staff to come up with a beautiful logo for Energy Conservation Award and so forth, and they established a plaque, and it's still going on, of course. It was a first, and we're certainly very proud of that.
That's good. What else was happening during your year? Anything else you can think of that was significant? You had your first meeting was in Denver, and then you went to Chicago.
To Chicago for the Chicago meeting.
And then the annual meeting was back again in Cincinnati?
In Cincinnati, right.
Okay.
I think those are pretty much the highlights that I can think of right now.
During your term, the Presidential Award of Excellence, did you make any modifications to that, do you recall? What your emphasis was on education, you said, during that time.
We did, and we did put get extra points and so forth for new young members on chapter level. But it's pretty much the PAOE award pretty much stayed the same. It was the changing of the point values and so forth, and nothing really significant in that area.
What personal accomplishments do you feel that you've had being involved in ASHRAE?
Oh, it's been a tremendous experience. I'm glad I had the opportunity to serve as chairman. Some of my best friends are ASHRAE people, and it's always a real pleasure in our annual and semi-annual meetings to see them and revisit them. Some of them are such close friends. We see them during the year when we're on a golfing vacation or something like that. It's been rewarding in many ways besides professional reward.
What kind of society activities have you been involved in since your term as presidency? I know once you become a presidential member, they don't let you off the hook. I'm sure you're still involved in things.
Oh, no. They certainly don't. They want to keep you involved. Well, of course, after my presidency, you're very active on the nominating committee. You're chairman of that by a session. And then a long-range planning committee for a number of years. We started a program shortly after that, which we had started. It was professional development. It was one of the items I mentioned to you, and we had these professional development courses that I spoke of earlier. In addition to that, we wanted to have some type of the home study program, and we started what we called the ACES program. And in the ACES program, it was really a correspondence program that you could get from ASHRAE, and we'd recommend reading assignments and so forth, and in turn you then had questionnaire that you'd fill out and so forth, and would send it in to Princeton University. And statistically, they did the grading and so forth, and sent your grades back to it. And if you felt that you saw that you were deficient in some areas, well then you'd have a chance to go back and review that, and to do more reading and so forth, and you could retake the test again, and if you wanted to. And I and about 7 other people, I guess, were instrumental in developing these tests. And we had a lot of fun doing that. It was very interesting to see it develop. It was called the ACES program, which is no longer in existence, but it was in the early 80s.
Can you tell me about some of the people that you've encountered along the way in ASHRAE and maybe some of their influence they've had on you? You mentioned your original professor at Ohio State who got you interested in ASHRAE. Who else along the way has had a big influence in you?
Well, right out of school, I had the opportunity of meeting and spending some time with Carl Ashley, who was director of research for Carrier. He's really a giant in research and development, and certainly one of our great ASHRAE members. People like Jordan and Priester, which I had the opportunity to work with and so forth. Burgess Jennings is another one. Clark Humphreys. I could name a number of people that I think had influence on my direction and my interest and my goals.
Good. What kind of advice would you give to a young person today about ready to get started in their career, about their career in engineering and also about ASHRAE?
Well, of course, as a professor, we get this all the time. They knock on the door and say, I'm a freshman here, and I don't know if I want to be an engineer or an economist. What do you suggest? Type of thing. So you got to sit and talk to them, and you try to guide them. Everybody doesn't need to go to college. As a professor, I can say that very strongly. But we need, we do need both types. Some people are not fitted to go to advanced schools or to college or into grad study. But the ones that do, and if they're interested in engineering, they have a direction and so forth. We have counselors, and we open the door for them. At least at Ohio State, that you're always welcome to come in and talk, and we can help you in any way we want. I have a young son that I wanted him to be a medical doctor. They're much make all the money, and he turned out to be a mechanical engineer. And of course, I said, "Well, you're going to go to Ohio State." And he said, "No, I'm not going to go to the redneck school." He said, "I want to go to one of those Eastern." So he picked Cornell and graduated from there, and he went on and got a job with a consulting engineer out of Philadelphia, and now he's president of the Philadelphia chapter. And he was just saying to me, he said, "Dad, I'd like to stay involved in ASHRAE." He said, "Well, what do you think I should get into? Would you recommend some TCs and some technical committees that I could get on that would be helpful to me, and I could be of help to them?" So we had a nice long talk over it. So sure. Another very important item that happened during my presidency was the formation of the council structures for our society. Previously, all the issues were brought to the board of directors. And you mentioned the fact that the historical committee needed X amount of dollars to do certain type of work. Well, in order to get that approved, it went before the board of directors. And it's not a large figure you were mentioning, but something that had to be approved by the board of directors. So we were doing a lot of committee work on the board of directors, and this ate up our time, and we'd go to some 1 o'clock in the morning sometimes in our board meetings of trying to accomplish all the work that needed to be done. So the idea was arrived at, and the decision was made that why don't we go into what we call the council structure. And in the council structure, we set up 5 councils. One is the Technology Council, the Publication Council, Administrative Council, a Member Council, and the Regent Council. And each of these councils were responsible for the activities of their committees such as R&T committee and technical council, or for administration, from publication as an example. It could be for the new handbook, details about the new handbook. And the councils then, meeting separately with their committee, with the committees that they're responsible for, made the decision. They discussed the items and so forth, and votes were made, and a vote was taken, and they in turn then came to the board of directors and made a report. Now, we put some restriction on the council, like, and the restrictions have changed and so forth. And I think some of the earlier restrictions, like research council could not spend more than, say, $100,000 for any research project. If you had a research project over $100,000, and I could be wrong in that figure. It could have been 50. I don't recall the number, but that was the limitation. And if you wanted more than, say, $100,000, you had to come directly to the board, and then that particular research project was discussed, why they needed that amount of money, what they were trying to accomplish, and so forth, and it became a board function rather than a council function. And that's true all the way down. In Regions Council, if they had some problems, the chapter operation, they wanted to make a change, well, it was settled in the Regions Council. And so the council chairman then came back and made a report to the board of directors of this is what we decided, and then in turn we vote on it, yes or no type of thing. But we didn't have to take the time to go over and make the detailed discussion, make the detailed discussions of why they came to that particular conclusion. And so
it sounds like based on that, you really freed up a lot of time for the board of directors.
Absolutely.
To get involved in more pressing issues.
Right. Now, of course, the length of time that the board now is in session has been reduced, mainly because, like, the president or the vice president, presidents and so forth, treasurers, they're involved in councils. They're either the chairman or vice chairman of these. So, but a lot of these, but 5 are going at one time rather than just one board of directors, and it's been extremely beneficial, and it's streamlined our operation. We're very, very happy about that. It came out fine.
What else did you accomplish during your term as president?
Well, there was a couple of items that came in. I remember the director of ARI, Air Conditioning Refrigeration Institute, spoke to the executive committee one time early in my presidency, and said, we have a problem, particularly with the ozone layer and the chlorofluorocarbon issue. He said there's a lot of activity going on in Congress about the depletion of the ozone layer. And he said, I want to bring this to your attention, that I think we should be concerned about it. So the first things I did was to set up a blue ribbon committee of outstanding researchers in the area of the chlorofluorocarbons. And they met 2 or 3 times a month. And they presented a position paper to the society, which in turn went to the board of directors, and then we in turn approved it or made some changes and so forth, and it became a position statement or a paper of our society. Now, that was one thing that I felt was very good, and of course out of that came research projects and direction to take in addressing the fluorocarbon issue, which has, of course, since that time become voluminous. It's been very, very important. Another item that was extremely important at that particular time was the Legionnaire's disease. Remember, we had a lot of people dying that had died in Philadelphia, and then we had in Pontiac, and they felt that it was due to air conditioning equipment. We felt on the board, and I as president, that we ought to look into this. You know, if it's our air conditioning equipment that's responsible for it, we should be doing something, setting up standards, maintenance suggestions, and so forth, So once again, we established a Blue Ribbon Committee to look into the issue of Legionnaire's disease. And we went outside the society and got people in that particular area, botanists, MDs and so forth, particularly from the Controlled Disease Center in Atlanta, Georgia. And they, in turn, came back with a very meaningful position paper on Legionnaire's disease, what we should do. And from that came standards, research projects, and so forth, which has been very, very meaningful in that particular area. Another thing, when this was all going on with the fluorocarbons, Legionnaire's disease, we said, you know, we really don't know what's going on in Washington, particularly when the director of ARI came to us and said, hey, you know, better start looking at this fluorocarbon issue. Said, you know, we really ought to have a presence in Washington, D.C. So we established, under my presidency, the Washington office. We hired Jim Cox from Texas A&M, Dr. James Cox, outstanding administrator and professor. He went to Washington, D.C., and he's still there. And his role is to not to be influential of legislature and so forth, but our representative to report back to us of what is going on and so forth. If they need expertise, we have expertise in refrigeration, we have air conditioning, expertise in ventilation and so forth. And we will help you with these problems if you need expertise in that particular area. And the Washington office has been very, very successful. Is now grown. I think we have 3 or 4 members of staff now. We have outgrown our old offices, and we've moved to new locations now, but it's a very important part of our society.
It sounds like there was quite a bit accomplished during your term as president.
Well, it seems like, but really a lot of us, everybody before us and people who came after us to make sure we did our bit for 1 year.
It's a team effort.
A team effort, absolutely.
All the way.
Right.
I'd like to thank you on behalf of the Historical Committee for participating in this leadership recalled interview. And once again, thank you, Chuck Sepsy.
Thank you.